Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. And this video is part of the monthly collaboration video series. And the topic for this month is revolts, riots, uprisings. Now this video is going to be a lot shorter than usual because I've already covered this topic extensively in video 35.3. That was part of the Kumazawa series. So if you want to look it up, it's the Kumazawa series and it's called Uprisings. It's video 35.3. So, but this will be a quick summary of the material from that video. So the video is going to cover pre-Edo uprisings, early Edo uprisings, later Edo uprisings, and a brief consideration of the military applications of uprisings. And before we continue, just take a moment to look at your screen, and these are the other channels that are part of this month's collaboration video. Each month we pick a topic and we make a video, and then we share links to each other's channels in the descriptions. I would also like to remind everyone that the views expressed on a particular channel are not representative of the views of the other members of the collaboration. Now let's focus on the pre-Edo, which for the purpose of this video is going to only focus on the Sengoku. So in other words, let's focus on the Sengoku period. During the Sengoku period, what is important for you to know are these points. Peasants do not own the land they worked on. They live there, they work it, they don't own it. The land is owned by the lord of the region, the daimyo of the region. And the peasants keep about on average 60% of their yield. 40% goes to the lord, 60% goes to the farmers, to the peasants. Merchants at this time period, in the Sengoku period, don't really hold any power. Now that's going to change significantly during the Edo period, and it has consequences. But during the Sengoku period, merchants just are not that powerful. Also during the Sengoku period, social mobility is a reality. So you can be a farmer one day and you can be a merchant the next day, and then maybe you can become whatever the next day, right? Because social mobility is still a thing in the Sengoku period. Also, very critically important, the peasants, whether they're farmers or artisans or merchants, they're not beholden to a countrywide leader. They're not beholden to the shogun. They're only beholden to their local daimyo. So this is very important. There's no system of totality throughout the whole country. Everything is just whatever daimyo that you're being taxed by, that's the only person that you answer to. So during the Sengoku period, almost all of the uprisings are conducted by something called an iki. Now, iki is oftentimes translated as uprising, and that's not accurate. Iki is a group or a collective, a league of individuals assembled. Now, the iki are the group that performs the uprising. The iki is made up mostly of peasants during the Sengoku period. However, almost always, and I gotta stress this, almost in every situation, the iki is made up of peasants, but it's run by a local samurai, a kokujin. And those local samurai who are running the iki or responsible for the ikis and this uprising, they're either trying to become the daimyo, so they want to overthrow the daimyo, or they are working on the orders of a daimyo. So almost all of the uprisings are political in nature. Sometimes they're masked as religious uprisings. Okay, so now we're moving into the Edo period. So Sengoku period's over. Now initially in the Edo period, you can classify military uprisings, or still uprisings, because again, even in the Sengoku period, almost always local samurai are behind them. So that does continue over initially into the Edo period. You have, there's a couple of attempts to overthrow military and political power, with the Shimabara being the last real uprising. And a lot of people like to say that Shimabara was a religious uprising, but if you actually examine the details, again, almost as always, it is a group of samurai using the face of a religious cause, but it's actually political underneath the surface. So, and then also, Yui Shosetsu planned and or attempted to orchestrate a military uprising, but that was extinguished before it started. So, for the most part, when we're in the Edo period, we get less of these military uprisings and we actually get genuine peasant uprisings. However, the majority of the uprisings are committed by farmers. Farmer uprisings the most common. The merchants don't really commit any riots or uprisings. The merchants actually get into forming criminal enterprises, almost like mafias and mobs. They have these merchant guilds that are shady, for lack of a better word. The guilds are legal entities, but they behave like mafias or mobs. It's the farmers who are the ones who truly do the uprisings of the Edo period. So we're going to look at farmer uprisings, and we're going to try to go through this quickly now. So in brief summary, Japan during the Edo period has a massive amount of wealth, particularly wealth in the form of resources such as rice. Right? So the Sengoku period's over. There's a lot of infrastructure that is now successfully operating because constant warfare destroys infrastructure. Well, now we're in the Edo period, we have constant infrastructure. So we have a lot of resource, and there's a huge amount of resource and wealth to manage. For example, in the 1600s, Japan has about 18.5 million koku, and then in 1700s it has about 26.4 million koku, give or take. Those are estimates, but those are in the ballpark. Now, the shogunate actually gives the task of managing this to the farmers themselves. I know that might surprise some people. They may think they thought the samurai. No, the farmers are overseen by a samurai administration, but it's the farmers themselves that actually do the management and the overseeing of the crops. And at this point, initially at least, the farmers develop rights over the land and land management procedures. Again, like I said, the samurai are in charge of the daimyo, the lord of the province is in charge of the domain, and he has a samurai infrastructure that's in charge of the different parts of the government, etc. But the farmers are ultimately the ones in charge of the land management, the farming, and the management of the crops. I discussed this more extensively in video 35.3. Especially I get into a tax system breakdown, but we're not going to do that for this video. You just basically need to know that there was a lot of resource that had to be managed, and it was actually managed by the farmers. Also in 35.3, I go into more details about how the farmers are arranged and how their power structure is developed, but for this video, let's focus on these 2 points. You have something called a nanushi, or also called a shoya, and that's the head of the village, usually appointed by the samurai administration of the domain. So the samurai administration appoints the nanushi, and the nanushi is responsible for administrating the land management and the crop management. Similar to the bushi, the farming groups are arranged in groups of 5. So just like the samurai are broken into 5-man squads, ashigaru's 5-man squads, the farmers are broken into 5-man squads. So I've laid the groundwork for that. Now let's talk about the uprisings, the actual farmer uprisings. As I said earlier, the merchant guilds are very powerful in the Edo period. They're basically organized criminal enterprises in many cases, and the farmers and the merchants oftentimes have serious issues with each other. The merchants don't do uprisings. The merchants do criminal enterprises, mafias, mobs. The farmers don't like it. They're always running into problems. Merchants are always giving farmers problems during the Edo period. Farmers also start to get taxed more and more. The tax used to be a 40-60, then it becomes a 50-50, then it becomes a 60-40, right? The taxes, after so many decades, the taxes shift towards them getting taxed more and more. But the key point that you need to know is that uprisings for farmers are not riots in the way that you might think of it. During the Edo period, farmer uprisings was a very formal procedure. It was a powerful procedure, but it was a procedure, and it also required human sacrifice. Seriously, let me explain. So here's the procedure. The farmers would form an iki. The iki would then write up in detail all their concerns and grievances. The iki would then march to the Lord's residence, and as they marched to the Lord's residence, they would riot and burn some buildings along the way. Then, when they got to the Lord's residence, they would demand a meeting, and they were absolutely given the meeting. There is that procedurally the meeting is they're not allowed to be turned away. So if the iki shows up, the Lord gives them a meeting, and at the meeting they present their formal document and give their verbal arguments. Then the Lord absolutely takes measures to resolve the issue and meet the demands and grievances of the iki. Local administrators were oftentimes removed from office. In other words, if an iki wrote the document, marched through the streets, burned the buildings, met with the Lord, gave their argument to the Lord, very often it would lead to the removal of whatever samurai was the local administrator, and changes would be implemented. However, what was the cost? And you see it in red on your screen. The cost is that the heads of the iki had to surrender themselves. They would be tortured and executed. So when an iki did this procedure, it was almost guaranteed to get the changes, but the heads of the iki had to sacrifice themselves. And that is the formal procedure for an uprising in the Edo period. And the historical record, in other words, on record, there's about 1,200 uprisings that are recorded through the Edo period. Like I said, the heads of the iki would be executed and the local administrators would be removed from office. So I'll read on the screen in red. The reality of this situation is that local administrators were terrified of iki groups reporting them to the lord of the province. So many times when there were issues, it was in the local administrator's best interest to resolve the issues himself and make sure that the iki did not form and then basically report their grievances to the Lord. However, now, having said all that, the procedure does become harder and deadlier after 1670. 1670 is the year when this begins to sort of go downhill for the farmers. The reason is because in 1670, that is where a law was passed that basically said it began to limit the farmers' ability to form ikis. Then in 1721, farmer iki are defined as something called a toto, and a toto is basically just an illegal militant mob. So if and when a bunch of people did decide to just sort of violently gather and then just vent their frustrations in a classical riot, that's pretty much called a toto. That wasn't super common, and that isn't the iki of the Edo period. Having said that, though, but in 1721, farmer ikis were then labeled toto. So this is where you sort of see an increase in toto activity, but many of those toto were just illegal samurai ikis. But the farming villages they still were able to submit their grievances, but they were not allowed to form large riot groups that marched and burned buildings down. They could meet, they could write the grievances, they could meet with the Lord, but they couldn't do it as massive groups. It had to be smaller, more condensed groups of key individuals traveling and presenting the document. In 1744, there was a law passed that basically um, gave sword-wearing rights to any Nanushi who snitched on any potential Ikkis. And that was a big deal, you know. Like how do you get how do you get farmers to turn on each other? Well, you offer that farmer the right to wear a sword if he snitches on any a potential Iki. Then in 1797, domains are now allowed to receive assistance from other domains to put down Toto, or to put down any riot or any Iki that's determined to be a riot or be a militant mob. And previously, prior to this year, if you were having issues with the peasants in your domain, you had to handle it yourself. But in 1797, you're allowed to ask for help from other domains, and they're allowed to send help. Then finally, the big kicker, in 1839, it became a law that it was legal to shoot into Iki crowds. You were now allowed to just gun down the Iki. It was now something that you could do in your domain to just deal with the issue. All right, and that's pretty much it. But let's go ahead and end the video with just a brief mention of the military applications. So in the Tada Genji Jingunden and the Kusunoki system, they both rely on the uprising principle. There's many techniques for this. Simply put, this is using someone else's resources, right? So if you send a small group of agents into enemy territory and they can succeed in turning ki, samurai, and groups of farmers and merchants over to your side, then you can convince them to engage in an uprising. Well, this gives you an entire group of people that will attack, burn down. You have this militant mob at your disposal, but that mob is an enemy resource. That's enemy people that are working for you. So you're using enemy resources to destroy enemy resources. And as you can imagine, that's a key teaching, that's a key detail. So the Tada Genji tradition and the Kusunoki Ryu, of course they have extensive methods for causing uprisings, causing riots. And you see it in red, teachings for defending and preventing uprisings among your own retainers, and for preventing uprisings and riots in your own territory. Because just as this is a technique that's very useful for you to do to your enemy, it's absolutely something that you have to guard against for your own people. All right, that's the end of the video.